By any standards, it was an astonishing development. For years in the Brexit negotiations, the EU stressed there must not, there could never be a border on the island of Ireland. Well, tonight they impose one without consultation, claiming that allowing vaccine supplies to be exported could cause social unrest within the EU.
I think it's quite incredible. It's an act of aggression, actually, less than a month into us leaving the European Union.
And then, a few minutes ago, the EU backtracked, suggesting it never even happened. But it has been a shambolic night. Also on News at 10. France closes its borders to all non-EU citizens to try and keep out COVID variants. Is this the way the world is going? There was more good news on vaccines here in the UK at least, as yet another is shown to work, the one-shot Janssen jab. China attempts to close the Hong Kong escape route as it says it will not recognise British national overseas passports. And a room with a view, the artists encouraging us to paint what we can see from our window.
It's so therapeutic. I mean, drawing is absolutely lovely. Do it. If you don't show it to anyone, it doesn't really matter.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. There have been moments this past week when it is hard to shake the sense the EU is determined to convince everyone who voted Remain that Brexit was a good idea after all. Having monumentally mucked up their vaccine rollout, they today moved a step closer to stopping supplies from leaving the EU's territory, even if legitimately ordered. And in the process, they triggered Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol. If that sounds obscure, it isn't. You may recall that all through the Brexit negotiations, the EU insisted there could never, ever be a border on the island of Ireland. Well, tonight they created one without consultation, claiming that allowing vaccines to cross the border could create societal difficulties as a result of the slow rollout of vaccines in the EU. No kidding. Northern Ireland's First Minister, Arlene Foster, said it was an incredible act of hostility and a despicable move. Even politicians in Dublin appeared blindsided by the decision. Boris Johnson expressed his grave concern, and then, in the last few minutes, the EU appeared to U-turn.
As people waited for their vaccinations in Londonderry this morning, it was hard to imagine that less than 6 miles away, the Irish border was about to become the centre of an astonishing escalation in the dispute over vaccine supply. This afternoon, the European Commission announced that due to concerns about access to the AstraZeneca vaccine, it was introducing export controls on all vaccines leaving the EU.
Today, we have developed a system that will allow us to know whether vaccines are being exported from the EU. This increased transparency will also come with the responsibility for the EU to authorise, with our member states, these vaccine exports.
Here, the government tried hard to stay out of the vaccine dispute.
I'm not going to comment on the EU's own discussions with those manufacturers. What we need to focus on is making sure that UK residents and the NHS here gets the vaccines that's required. And as I say, we're confident that we will be receiving what we expected in the days and weeks ahead.
There is one place where the EU could not control exports, the Irish border. The painfully negotiated Irish protocol in the Brexit deal forbids restrictions of trade, but there's an override clause. Article 16 says if the protocol's application leads to serious economic, societal or environmental difficulties, then the EU or the UK may unilaterally take appropriate safeguard measures. This afternoon, the EU published a regulation blocking vaccine exports across the border, saying this is justified as a safeguard measure pursuant to Article 16. Astonishingly, the European Commission did not tell London, or even, I am told, Dublin, that they were about to take this provocative action. A Number 10 spokesperson said the UK was seeking an urgent explanation from Brussels and was carefully considering what the government's next steps might be. This evening, the Prime Minister had a phone call with the Irish Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, to express his concerns. In Northern Ireland, right across the political spectrum, there is fury with the EU.
Well, I think it's quite incredible. It's an act of aggression, actually. Less than a month into us leaving the European Union, we see them act in this unilateral way. It shows to me that all of their words around protecting Northern Ireland and protecting the Belfast Agreement were just that, words, and actually what they've been doing is using Northern Ireland as a pawn in their negotiations.
A short time ago, the Prime Minister called the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, to express his grave concerns. And there were signs that the Commission was frantically backtracking, with sources there claiming the regulation invoking Article 16 of the protocol had been published in error. Carl Dinny, News at 10, Downing Street.
All right, so just how did we get to the point where efforts to contain a global pandemic blew up into a major diplomatic row? It wasn't until today that the EU actually approved the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, regulator-wise at least. But all week there have been very public tensions over its supply, or rather the lack of it. The EU needs every dose it can get after a painfully slow rollout of vaccines so far, with some countries already reporting shortages. Today, a redacted version of the contract the two sides signed was published, but that did little to settle who was in the right.
The context for this escalating row is a vaccine rollout in the European Union that has hit significant problems and is beginning to cause some real political fallout.
Now the companies must deliver. They must honour their obligations.
We want our contract to be fully fulfilled.
European nations put Brussels in charge, but whatever the cost advantages of central coordination, it slowed things down, aggravated by production delays, first at Pfizer, then AstraZeneca. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen believes AstraZeneca should be making up the shortfall with doses already manufactured in the UK. On German radio this morning, rejecting the company's claims that the contract only said it must make best efforts to deliver the vaccine.
Best effort gilt, solange nicht klar war, ob sie einen Impfstoff entwickeln können. Diese Zeit haben wir jetzt hinter uns.
That contract was published today. It did, in fact, make no fewer than 15 mentions of best or best reasonable efforts. But, giving ammunition to both sides, it also specified that the contract should draw on vaccines manufactured in the UK, a view backed by a Commission spokesman.
It is foreseen that these plants will contribute to the effort of AstraZeneca to deliver doses to the European Union. There is absolutely no question for us that this is what the contract specifies.
Supply problems and red tape have held back the vaccine rollout across the EU. In Spain, first doses have been stopped in Madrid and Cantabria so others can get their second on time, and vaccines are running out in Catalonia. In Germany, vaccine shortages are expected to run well into April, with shortages too in Austria and in France, where in 3 regions, including Paris, appointments for vaccinations are being postponed. Vadia Otte on the Côte d'Azur has already had her appointment put back 3 times.
And then when I got my appointment, they said, we didn't receive the vaccines. And they told me, even if we receive the vaccine, we will not have enough shot to give you the second one.
The response now from Brussels is to put in place powers to restrict exports of vaccines to others, including Britain and Northern Ireland, if Europe doesn't have enough for their own use. And this over a vaccine that they ordered late, approved very slowly, and which they don't believe works very well. The Germans won't use it on over 65s, and France's President Macron claimed falsely today that it may be only 10% effective. A strange issue to have escalated this far. James Mace, News at 10.
And Robert joins me now. Robert, I mean, you probably heard James say there. Bizarre, really, that the EU has chosen to escalate it this far. So where do you see this going?
So, look, last night on the News at 10, I described this row over vaccines between the UK and the EU as one hell of a mess, but I didn't expect it to escalate quite as it has. The fundamental point is this. The EU was late in awarding contracts to manufacture vaccines, and they now haven't got enough. And what they see across the channel is a UK that since the spring has been placing huge £100 million orders to buy billions of doses of vaccine. They see us potentially emerging with an oversupply and, essentially being self-sufficient. And what they see around the EU is many countries struggling to even begin a serious vaccine campaign. And so what they've basically put into place is a policy of vaccine protectionism, essentially hoarding what there is in the EU for EU use, even though some of what's being produced in the EU is subject to contracts for overseas sales, including to the UK. Now, the reason that they initially and now seem to have withdrawn this hardening up of the border between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland by invoking what's known as Article 16 of the Northern Ireland Protocol is because they didn't want to see essentially Northern Ireland becoming a backdoor for what they see as European Union vaccines getting in to Great Britain. But the problem with invoking it is quite apart from that destroying everything they claim to hold dear, which is that the Good Friday Agreement relies on an open border. It also basically showed that they didn't have any confidence in the Northern Ireland Protocol itself. And that, I think, was deeply damaging. Now, the European Commission are now saying that they never really invoked it, and they're still sort of basically implying it's all a terrible mistake. But the vaccine protectionism is still there. One other point I think it is worth making, there are lots of people who've been sceptical about the value of Brexit. It has to be said that outside the EU, Boris Johnson and this government has acquired significant stocks of vaccines. We're by no means certain that we'll get the supplies that we think we are contractually owed from the EU, but in general, the UK looks in a much better place when it comes to vaccines than the European Union.
OK, Robert, thank you very much indeed. Well, the escalating row with our nearest neighbours aside, it has been a pretty good 24 hours for vaccine news. Last night, we found out US firm Novavax's could soon be approved. Today, another returned positive results. Johnson & Johnson's vaccine from its subsidiary Janssen is particularly effective at preventing serious illness and death, and crucially, does so after just a single dose. 30 million have been ordered for the UK, where almost 8 million people have now had their first jab.
You wait months for a new vaccine, and then two come along at once. After news of a highly protective jab from US company Novavax, today Janssen Pharmaceuticals, part of healthcare giant Johnson & Johnson, announced their single-shot COVID vaccine is 66% effective at preventing infections, and better still when it comes to severe illness.
We are very excited because we have been able to show across the world an efficacy on severe disease of 85%, taking out severe disease, death and hospitalization at day 28 after vaccination with one single shot at that level is very, very important.
The UK has ordered 30 million doses of the new Janssen single jab and 60 million doses of the Novavax vaccine, both of which are in their final phase of trials. If approved, they'll add to our 40 million Pfizer jabs and 100 million AstraZeneca doses. 17 million Moderna vaccines are also approved, but none have been deployed in the UK yet. Neither of the new vaccines needs special storage, and a one-shot jab means a rapid rollout. But when will we get them?
My expectation is we will see Novavax vaccine coming to the UK because it's being manufactured in the UK. We'll see that more quickly than we'll see Janssen, because Janssen has been public about saying that their manufacturing scale-up has not been as quick as they had expected. So I think Janssen we should expect summertime, and hopefully we may get some Novavax in the spring.
The availability of any vaccine is hard to predict. Global demand is intense. But if supplies do flow, having 5 different COVID jabs available in the UK could make a real difference. Right now, the vaccine is being prioritised to save the lives of those at risk. But having more doses sooner could mean using vaccination to prevent transmission of the virus and potentially an end to future lockdowns.
We really could see big inroads being made in this country into the pandemic, into the epidemic. We really could see a driving down of the infection rate, and that would be great. That would really allow us to get back to normal that bit quicker.
The two new vaccines show effectiveness against concerning variants, like the one common in South Africa, but protection isn't perfect. The race is now on between human ingenuity and a fast-evolving virus.
And Tom is here, of course, to talk about all this. Look, amazing news again. You know, quite a lot of us get a bit confused by these efficacy figures. You know, are you bothered that this one appears to be much lower than, say, Pfizer's?
After a year of reporting on the pandemic, I've almost forgotten how to do optimistic and cheerful. But the results are they are really good. I mean, they are much better than we could have expected right at the beginning of this. Yes, that's overall 66% efficacy from that vaccine trial. Sounds bad, but yeah, they're highlighting the fact, given to people, it prevents the most severe illness and death. And that's really what's important. And that is comparable with the other vaccine trials. And the fact of these trials, because they're all conducted in different ways, with different endpoints, it's very hard to compare one with the other. And what experts will say is until we actually start deploying them, see how they behave in the real world, it's very difficult to tell. But the readout from all the trials we've seen so far have been very positive, except for the ones that have failed early and been cleared off. The one big question remaining is these new variants. Some positive news again from these new trials, because they were done later. They were the first to actually be tested against people with the UK variant, and in South Africa with the variant that's dominant there. They show quite promising effects, but it does look likely we'll be sitting here in 7 months' time talking about new vaccines against new variants, I think.
OK. You know, new variants is something that everyone is talking about in government at the moment. Very worried about it. There's been a huge debate here. Do we shut our borders? France has literally shut its borders tonight, except for emergency travel. You know, other EU countries are allowed in, which I imagine they have to, but completely shut. Do you think, I mean, what do you make of that? Is this the way the world is going?
I mean, it's concerning, but perhaps not surprising at all. You know, France is dealing with a big surge in its cases. They've been going up slowly, but deaths are now beginning to rise. They're dealing with a vaccine shortage, as we've just been hearing. That applies to France as well. They don't want to go into a third lockdown. It's politically very, very difficult, so shut the borders. There's some sense in that. It will help keep out variants. You know, even EU passport holders are going to have to show a negative test to enter France. They're getting pretty tough on this, promising tougher restrictions as well. But the fact of the matter is, the new variant from the UK is already present in France. Scientists there are advising the government it will probably be the dominant variant by as early as March. So they can't keep this virus out. And like everywhere else in the world where you have high transmission, the virus can adapt. As we roll out vaccines, as we become immunised by infection with the virus, it has the chance to mutate. So they can't stop it that way. It's likely they will be facing another lockdown too, I think.
OK, Tom, thank you very much indeed. Now, even with the progress being made on vaccines, the lifting of the lockdown may be some way off if figures out today are anything to go by. Infection rates appear to have levelled off throughout the UK, remaining stubbornly high. In England, around 1 in 55 people had the virus last week, similar to the week before, and a further 1,245 deaths were very sadly reported today in the UK, with more than 29,000 new cases of the virus. Well, if effective, the vaccines will ease pressure on the NHS, or should. Until then, some treatments are inevitably on hold. Treatments which can include potentially life-saving cancer surgery. Hundreds fewer operations took place in early January than normal. In an attempt to clear the backlog, special cancer hubs have been set up, but oncologists say not enough is being done. Meanwhile, patients being forced to wait face growing uncertainty about what the future holds.
For much of the last year now, too many of these have sat empty. Operating theatres in hundreds of hospitals underused because of coronavirus. Without staff or beds in critical care, many urgent operations have been cancelled. But the need is still there and still urgent.
After 2 cancellations now, I'm really starting to worry about it.
Glyn Lewis has prostate cancer. He's been waiting for surgery, but it keeps being postponed, and now he doesn't even have a future date.
They will just monitor it and look for and wait for changes, basically. So, you know, the way I see it, it's gambling with my life, isn't it? Like, you're waiting for it to get worse before they treat you. You know, he said, I can't promise you it won't spread within that 3 months as well, so that's a bit worrying.
So concerned, Glyn is now raising money to have his operation done privately. NHS England insists surgery that should be done within 4 weeks will be prioritised, but some hospital trusts have had to cancel such procedures. One cancer hub at the Royal Marsden in London is taking patients from across the southeast to ensure they are treated.
It is unheard of, but it's worked extremely well. And actually over 5,000 patients now have been operated on through our hub. And since early January, 357 patients have gone through the hub in the second phase.
Clean cancer hubs like this are saving lives. There are a few others across the country where hospital trusts have joined forces, but given the scale of the problem and the horrible reality that survival rates are reduced by 10% for every 4-week delay, I think it's quite clear that there simply aren't enough of them.
In the first 2 weeks of January, there were 800 fewer cancer surgeries than usual, leading some now to describe it a crisis.
We have to save cancer patients as well as COVID patients, and I think the question for the government is, are they prepared to invest and make the same urgency and priority to this as they have done with COVID and the vaccines? The frontline staff can do this. It's got to be the third big priority now in the healthcare.
Peter can't even get a diagnosis. He's lost 4 stone in 6 months. Despite concerns he has cancer, numerous scans have been postponed.
It's not a life. This ain't a life. This is just laying there and wondering what's happening the following day, and nothing's happening the following day. And then when people phone up and say there's nothing we can do, there is something they can do. They can do a part of that hospital to get the people in. But why should other people suffer for a virus?
We may never know the true extent of the damage done to cancer patients. The tragic legacy of COVID looks set to continue for years to come. Emily Morgan, News at 10.
OK, let's move on to some non-COVID news now. And this Sunday marks a significant moment for people living in Hong Kong who have British national overseas status. A new visa scheme will allow them to move to the UK and eventually become citizens. Around 300,000 are expected to take advantage. The Chinese, though, are most unhappy and have said they will no longer recognise British national overseas passports. And Debbie is in Beijing to talk about all this. Debbie, what impact, in essence, will this have?
Well, this kind of retaliation from the Chinese government was not unexpected. It is likely to lead to a further deterioration of relations between China and the UK. The British government has said that they are disappointed but not surprised. The impact of this move by China is in fact going to be quite limited. Many of those currently seeking to escape from Hong Kong do also have Hong Kong IDs that they can use to enter and leave the territory. But it is likely to deter many from trying over fears of the difficulties or problems that they might face at the border. So far, China has not moved to interfere in Hong Kong's customs and borders control. This special visa status for BNO passport holders was introduced last year in response to the national security law imposed on Hong Kong by Beijing, which has basically outlawed any form of dissent and led to hundreds of arrests, and many of those expected to take up the offer when it's formally introduced on Sunday will be many of those pro-democracy campaigners who are now living in fear of arrest.
OK, Debbie, thank you very much indeed. Now, if you owned a television in the 60s, there are 2 things you're very likely to have watched: the 1966 World Cup final and a 1969 documentary which lifted the curtain on the lives of the royal family. And whilst you can relive England's triumph to your heart's content, the latter was locked away, supposedly at the Queen's request. That is, until earlier this month, when it resurfaced on YouTube, albeit not for long. Apparently, it's still a sensitive subject.
Or you could say that he would... When it was first broadcast on the BBC and ITV in 1969, 3/4 of the country watched it, rare as it was to have such an insight into life behind palace walls.
I asked when I arrived on it, it was the King, and they said,
He's in the garden, and I went out, and there's nothing to be seen except a lot of terribly rude words and language coming out of a rhododendron bush.
We are showing you some clips of the film here that have been in circulation since then.
What's this for?
But the entire documentary, simply called Royal Family, has never been seen since the early 1970s. It was locked away at the palace's request. That was until it found its way onto YouTube this month and clocked up 10,000 views until it was taken down again.
I know for a fact that the reason that they didn't want it to go on being shown was quite simply that they didn't want it to get overexposed, and they didn't want it to be used for advertising or commercial purposes and things like that. And then I suppose as time has gone on, it's rather been superseded by other documentaries which bring things much more up to date.
It's jolly powerful, that isn't it?
Interest in the 1969 documentary was reignited recently after The Crown on Netflix dramatised the whole thing during season 3.
It's a documentary film, like one of those wildlife films.
Yes, except this time, we are the endangered species.
Buckingham Palace did not want to comment directly on the film's sudden appearance on YouTube, but a royal source did say that from time to time material does end up on the internet which shouldn't be there. Here, palace aides believe that royal films are all the more interesting because of their scarcity.
I've become a hairdresser this lockdown.
These days, the royals do give little glimpses of their life, but on their own terms. This was the Duchess of Cambridge today, chatting about parenting and homeschooling.
But at the end of the day, I do feel exhausted.
Many parents might relate to that, but the film from more than half a century ago will remain locked away, or as much as it can be these days, now it's already been watched online. Chris Ship, News at 10.
Finally, if we're being honest, most of us have got a bit sick of sitting at home looking out of the window during the past 10 months. So, to break the monotony of lockdown, instead of staring at the view, why not paint it? That's what one French artist started doing, encouraging others to do the same. The idea was embraced by young and old the world over, so much so that their works are going to be displayed in a museum, hopefully one we can visit before too long.
There have been numerous attempts to portray the scale and shock of lockdown. These beautiful drone shots offer a stark portrait of our emptied towns and cities. But for many of us, our view of this crisis has been more intimate, framed by the windows of the buildings which confine us. Now, this claustrophobic world has been harnessed by one artist in France and turned into a genre all its own. When Gabrielle Thierry painted the view from her studio outside Paris and posted it on social media, she had no idea it would go viral. Her appeal to artists around the world to do the same yielded more than 250 works, illustrated by people aged 5 to 80, all gathered together in a new exhibition.
You can feel sometimes in front of these sketches and paintings, you can feel loneliness, you can feel fear, you can feel hopes, you can feel different kind of feelings.
One of the contributors was Gail McKay from Eastbourne, who painted the view from her attic.
Nothing was going on outside, so it was nice to capture the stillness. It's quite symbolic, really, everything going on inside, and then outside, you know, empty, you know, still nobody's there.
She thinks reflecting on something so familiar is akin to meditation.
It's so therapeutic. I mean, drawing is absolutely lovely. Do it, if you don't want to show it to anyone, it doesn't really matter. But drawing outside your window, it'll bring some peace of mind, just sitting down and doing something gently and quietly.
The irony is this exhibition about lockdown is taking place within lockdown. These windows into people's own personal experiences of the pandemic will have to be viewed online for now, but still perhaps offer nourishment for the soul at a time when we all need it. Dan Rivers, News at 10, Eastbourne.
Something to do this weekend, maybe. Have a brilliant one. That's it. Night-night. Thanks for watching.